Okay, good evening to those of you joining electronically. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel, starting in chapter 8. 2 Samuel, chapter 8. We're going to continue the narrative here, the study of this prophetic book and historical book as well, I guess you could say, and especially in the reign of King David. After this, it came to pass that David attacked the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Metheg-ammah from the hand of the Philistines. Then he defeated Moab, forcing them down to the ground. He measured them off with a line. With 2 lines he measured off those to be put to death, and with 1 full line those to be kept alive. So the Moabites became David's servants and brought tribute. So here you see David's success as a military leader, that God gave him victory over the enemies round about them, Philistines and Moabites here. David also defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, as he went to recover his territory at the river Euphrates. David took from him 1,000 chariots, 700 horsemen, and 20,000 foot soldiers. Also, David hamstrung all the chariot horses, except that he spared enough of them for 100 chariots. When the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of the Syrians. So God is giving David victory all around him against all his enemies. Now, we do not necessarily face physical enemies today. You may, and that's a possibility. But we certainly face spiritual enemies on a daily basis, because if we belong to Jesus Christ, then we have an enemy, and his name is Satan, and he is out to cause us difficulty. Well, as God gave David victory over the Philistines and Moabites and others in the area, God will also give us victory, but it's the same formula. It is relying on him and having faith in him and being obedient and following him. That's where the victory comes from. Well, most of the battles at that point in history, the only standoff weapon would have been a bow and arrow. So, I'm sure you had some people killed by archers at a distance, but most people died from trauma as a result of hand-to-hand sword and spear combat. Really, combat at that point in history was very brutal, very brutal. You literally hack people to death is what you did. The stuff they show on TV is probably not much like it actually was. It was. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know that the armies of Israel at this point in time were not really. They were more professional, I guess, than they had been. But it was later on, you think about more efficient professional armies like the Romans doing maneuver and stuff, but yeah, it probably was a slugfest pretty much, I'm thinking. But in any case, and now in some cases, God gave a miraculous victory because he would use hail or sometimes hornets or something else to drive the enemy away. So it wasn't always the sword of Israel that brought the end, but yeah, the battles were brutal. They were brutal. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was bad. I'm sure it was bad. Blood would have been bad, and yeah, it was. Yeah, you don't want to be in the middle of it. Definitely not. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the battles sometimes would last all day. So you'd fight over wounded or you dying or dead, troops, definitely. So in verse 5, when the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of the Syrians. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became David's servants and brought tribute. So the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Notice the end of that verse. The Lord preserved David wherever he went. David's success, David's victories, was not because David was so good at what he did. It's because God gave him the victory. Anytime Israel faced enemies without God, the result was always bad for the Israelites. And it'd be the same thing for us. If we try to face Satan, we face demons, we face whatever on our own power, it's going to be a sad day. We face anybody, anything, any enemy we face in the power of Christ, not in our own power. And David took the shields of gold that had belonged to the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. Also from Betah and from Borthel, the cities of Hadadezer, King David took a large amount of bronze. So he's taking the gold, silver, bronze, all the precious metals from these places. When Tol, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated all the army of Hadadezer, then Toi sent Joram, his son, to King David to greet him and bless him because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him, for Hadadezer had been at war with Toi. And Joram brought with him articles of silver, articles of gold, and articles of bronze. So here's a king in the area that's sending, an ambassador to David with all these precious metals that's saying, good job, you did good because I didn't like this other guy anyway, kind of thing. King David also dedicated these to the Lord, along with the silver and gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he has subdued. So David is storing up gold and silver and bronze. Why? Yeah, he's gonna store it up for the temple because God's already told David, you're not going to build my house. So David is going to have everything ready for Solomon. So when Solomon ascends to the throne, he can start building the temple. Everything will be ready. So David's bringing it in. So King David, verse 11, also dedicated these to the Lord, along with the silver and gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued, from Syria, from Moab, from the people of Ammon, from the Philistines, from Amalek, and from the spoil of Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zorba. And David made himself a name which he returned from, when he returned from killing 18,000 Syrians in the Valley of Salt. So this is in addition to the 22,000 that's already died in the battle before. And so you might think, boy, there's a lot of folks in that part of the world. Well, yeah, there are. But you also got to understand there were not as many people back then as there are now. So these number of casualties by modern standards it'd be a lot larger number percentage-wise. David's? I don't know that we know. I mean, his was it? There was a number we saw earlier. What was it? 30,000? Wasn't it 30,000 earlier we saw? It varied because, Israel, you would draw the manpower from the tribes when you needed them, so you didn't necessarily have a huge standing army. Now, it looks like at this point in time that they probably did have because David was in a lot of battles. David was a warring king. I mean, he had a bunch of wars going on, so he probably had a more regular standing army than they had before then. But I don't know. I don't know that we know for sure. But the point is, it doesn't really matter the number of troops David had. What mattered is that God was fighting his battles. So he could have done it with 600 or 60,000. It don't really matter. Because the victory belonged to the Lord, because God brought the victory. So it wasn't the number of troops David had. As a matter of fact, we'll see at a later point in time, David sinned by numbering the people when God didn't tell him to, because David was saying, look how many people I've got. And so God brought judgment on him for doing that, because he didn't tell him to do it. Because the point is, God brought the victory. David didn't do it. So in verse 14, the Lord preserved David wherever he went. That's the important point. He put garrisons in Edom. All Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Verse 14. Now 15, so David reigned over all Israel, and David administered judgment and justice to all his people. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the army. So Joab is like the chief of staff, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or general of the army, whatever you want to call him. He's David's military guy. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the priests. Sariah was the scribe. Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Cherethites and the Perethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. So that's the bureaucracy. That's who's running the thing, everything, okay? So in chapter 8, you see that David's kingdom now is like, now all this didn't happen in one day, but it's like one thing after another, and it's just the dominoes are falling into place because God's doing this. You remember it took David a long time to ascend the throne because it's God's timing, and for whatever reason, God did not have him take over for some number of years. But now that David is the king, God's put him on the throne, then boom, the dominoes are falling, and all of the enemies are being subdued, and everything's falling into place. Chapter 9. Now David said, "Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now, this is unusual in the world, because normally if you are the king and you had a former king that still had any kids, what would you do? You wanted to rub them out because you didn't want anybody to challenge your throne. But that's not what David's doing here, because David understands it's God that's put him on the throne, and he remembers his covenant with Jonathan. And so he's saying, is there anybody left of Saul's household, because I want to show kindness to him, because of Jonathan. And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" He said, "At your service." So in other words, he knows Ziba was a servant in the house of Saul, so he's figuring he's got more information. Then the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." Now, you guys remember way back the kid that fell, the maid fell with the kid and injured his feet? This is the kid. He's not a kid anymore, but this is the kid. So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-debar. Now, if you're Mephibosheth and the king's envoys show up to bring you out, that's probably is probably scared to death here, yeah. Now, when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, "Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "Here is your servant." So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." So I suspect there was a whew, probably out of his when he heard that. And then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So David's given Ziba a charge: as you serve Saul, you're going to serve Mephibosheth now. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons." So David remembers the covenant he made with Jonathan and his friendship with Jonathan, and he is repaying the kindness. And so even though normally he would be considered a threat to the throne and would be done away with, now David brings him into his house and treats him like one of his own. sons. Verse 12, Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. Which at that point in time would have been, that's hard because you can't get out and do anything. I don't know how he got around, if people carried him on a stretcher thing or what, or if he could stumble. I don't know how he got around. But David was true to his word and honored the covenant, honored the commitment. And even though Jonathan's gone, David remembers the kindness, and he is paying that kindness to Jonathan's son here. And it behooves us to remember kindness and to show kindness. Now, hopefully we don't just show kindness because we've had kindness shown to us. Hopefully we do it whether that's the case or not. But we also need to remember to pay it forward, I guess you could say. Mephibosheth hadn't done anything for or against David, but Jonathan had, and so David is showing kindness to Mephibosheth because of the covenant and because of the kindness of Jonathan. Sometimes it's the little act. It don't have to be a grand thing to do. Sometimes it's a small thing that can make somebody's day. The other day, I was in the line at McDonald's going to get some breakfast before work, and the person in the car in front of me bought my breakfast. Now, I've had that happen at Chick-fil-A before, but I'd never had it happen at McDonald's, so it really surprised me. And it made my day. Like, that's nice, So, my breakfast was probably $6. It wasn't a whole lot, but it's just the thought that mattered. That person thought enough to do that. So, it's good to be able to do that, especially when people don't expect it, or even more so when they don't deserve it, because that's what mercy is about, isn't it? When they don't deserve it, you give it. That's what grace is all about. So, it's good to do that. Mephibosheth had done nothing to deserve that mercy, but David extended it to him, and even more than just mercy. So David is at maybe the height of his power right here. Now, again, the power comes from God. It's not David's power, but in David's military career, if you want to put it that way, this is probably the high point. Nobody's standing in front of David. They're falling left and right. Syrians, Moabites, Ammonites, it don't matter. They're all falling before David and his armies. So I know it'd be hard for you to see, but the map right here shows David's conquests. So he's carved out this whole area right here. Syrians, Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites, they're all Philistines. They've all fallen before him because God is with him. Okay, any questions or comments? What do you think? It's faithfulness. It is obedience that is necessary. God is looking for faithfulness, and he's looking for obedience. Saul did not do that. Saul didn't exercise that, and so God took the kingdom away from him. He gave it to David. Now, why was David a man after God's own heart? Because David trusted God, he had faith in God, he was obedient. Now, does that mean David never messed up? No, David had some big uh-ohs we're going to see as we go forward. He had some big deals. But he was still a man after God's own heart, and God blessed David. Saul, the sad truth is, Saul could have been used by God had he been faithful and had he been obedient, but he chose not to. He chose his own way, which led to death. And the same thing happens today as well. When we choose our own way, we bring pain, we bring difficulty, we bring defeat to ourselves or to others. When we follow and obey and have faith and trust in God, then we are going to have victory. That's just the short answer and the short recipe. Easy to say, sometimes not as easy to do, but absolutely necessary if we want to have victory, ultimate victory. Because as I said earlier, our enemies are not Philistines and Moabites and Edomites and all these. Our enemies, Satan, the forces of darkness, the way of the world, whatever way you want to couch those terms. And it's an everyday battle. It's an everyday battle because they do not take vacations. They do not take off days. They are, and the closer you get to serving the Lord and doing what he calls, the harder they're going to work to try to keep you from doing that. So that's where the battle really comes in then. And it may not be as bloody as some of these conflicts are in the sense that blood's spraying everywhere, but it's no less violent. It's just as if not more so, than these battles were. So what do y'all think? David is on the move up. He's on the move up. But pretty soon he's going to have a dip in the road. We'll see that in a little bit. Actually, we'll see that in chapter 11. So, okay. Anybody else? Anything else? You freezing over there? Really? Wait till in the morning. It's going to be cold in the morning. It's going to be 40 degrees in the morning. Oh, no. Shh. 38. Don't be saying that. Oh, 38 would break the record. The wind chill, if the wind stays like this, it's going to be even worse in the morning. So. Okay, well, let's pray. Father, again, thank you for your love and your blessings. Thank you for your word. Help us to be workers rightly dividing the word of truth. And, Father, help us to not just be hearers, but to be doers of your word. Dismiss us in your love. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.